I was curled up on the couch, half distracted by some mindless TV, when Mark leaned against the doorway with this oddly pleasant smile. Out of nowhere, he said, "You should go out with your friends more. Have fun. Relax. Don't worry about me." For a second, I almost laughed. Mark? Encouraging me to have a social life? That wasn't his style. Usually, if I mentioned dinner plans, he'd sigh, maybe even pout a little. But this time, he sounded so generous. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe he was finally softening after all these years. Maybe he'd realized I deserved a little joy outside our four walls. Honestly, the thought made me smile. I told myself not to overthink it, that maybe our marriage had turned a corner. It felt refreshing, almost flattering, to hear him put my happiness above his own for once. Part of me wanted to believe it was just a new, better version of him. But then he said it again, and again. Each time the same easy tone, almost too smooth, like a line he'd practiced in his head. He kept nudging me. Call your friends, set a date, don't worry about me. The more he said it, the less natural it felt. There was something just slightly off, something I couldn't put my finger on. Why was he pushing so hard for me to go? At first I tried to ignore the little knot forming in my stomach. Maybe I was just being suspicious, I told myself. After all, wasn't this what women wanted? A husband who encouraged them to enjoy life? To have fun with friends? Still, it felt strange. Mark wasn't the type to hand out freedom so easily. He had always liked keeping me close, knowing where I was and what I was doing. This sudden change of tune almost felt like whiplash. The more I replayed his words in my head, the less innocent they seemed. Go on, Claire. Enjoy yourself. He'd say it with that half smile, his eyes darting just a little too quickly back to the phone in his hand. I started noticing the timing, too. He only ever suggested it on certain nights, right when he knew I didn't have plans. It was as if he was trying to script my life, pushing me out just so he could… What? Sit in silence? Watch the game? Something didn't add up. I began to watch him more closely, to measure the pauses between his words and the little flicker of relief on his face whenever I said yes. It was subtle, but it was there. That small exhale, like he'd just cleared a hurdle. It made my skin prickle in ways I didn't want to admit. Because deep down, I felt it. This wasn't about me needing more fun. It was about him needing me gone. One night, as I slipped my shoes on by the door, he practically hurried me along, pressing the keys into my hand with that too bright grin. Go enjoy yourself, Claire. Don't wait up for me, he said, like he couldn't get me out fast enough. That was the moment the knot in my stomach tightened. I remember pausing, fingers frozen around the doorknob, thinking, since when does my husband want me gone so badly? I drove away that evening, but my mind didn't follow the road. It lingered back at the house, replaying his tone, his insistence. The warmth I had once mistaken for kindness now felt like a performance, one rehearsed so carefully I almost believed it. Almost. Every word of encouragement seemed heavier now, weighed down with a truth he wasn't saying out loud. And once you feel that kind of shift, you can't unfeel it. By the time I returned home, the living room looked exactly the same, the TV humming, his shoes kicked off by the couch. But I couldn't shake the sense that something had moved, something invisible but real. That was when I started to wonder, if he wanted me out of the house so badly, what exactly was happening while I was gone? It started with the smallest things, the kind of details you almost talk yourself out of noticing. One night, I caught a faint trace of perfume in our bedroom. Not mine, not any scent I'd ever worn. It clung to the air like an unwelcome guest, sweet and heavy, impossible to ignore. I stood there, frozen, the hanger still in my hand, wondering if maybe I was imagining it, but deep down, I knew better. Then came the wine glass. Just one, sitting in the sink, smudged with lipstick I didn't own. Mark had been in the kitchen before me, humming like he had nothing to hide. My chest tightened as I rinsed it out, pretending not to notice. But the silence between us in those moments felt louder than any argument we'd ever had. I couldn't look at him without seeing questions stacked up behind his eyes. And the dog, my sweet, loyal dog, started barking near the front door on nights I came home earlier than expected. Not the playful bark, but sharp, urgent, the kind that says, "Someone's here." Except when I walked in, the house was spotless, quiet, like nothing had happened at all. My heart would pound as I looked around, every shadow suddenly suspicious. Each little clue whispered the same truth I didn't want to face. He didn't want me gone for me. He wanted me gone for him. I started watching him the way you watch a stranger you don't quite trust. Every little movement felt like a clue. The quick way he'd shut his phone when I walked into the room, the sudden energy he had when he thought I'd be leaving for the night. It was like living with two versions of Mark, the husband who smiled and kissed my cheek, and the man who practically pushed me out the door with that false warmth. Inside, I wrestled with myself. Was I being paranoid? Was I inventing ghosts out of thin air? But then I'd catch another whiff of perfume, or notice the faintest trace of wine still lingering in the air, and the questions came roaring back. If I asked him directly, he'd laugh it off, tell me I was imagining things. And maybe I wanted to believe him, but my gut wouldn't let me. Nights became heavier, filled with silence that pressed against my skin. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word he'd said, every door he'd nudged me through. The pieces didn't just fit, they screamed. Something was happening in my home while I was gone. And once that seed of suspicion takes root, it grows fast, twisting through every corner of your mind until you can't think of anything else. One afternoon, after pacing circles in my head for days, I decided I couldn't just sit and wonder anymore. If Mark wanted me out of the house so badly, then I needed to know what happened while I was gone. My hands shook as I ordered a small hidden camera online, something discreet, easy to tuck into the living room without him ever noticing. The thought alone made my stomach churn, but so did the idea of living blind to the truth. When it arrived, I waited for the perfect moment, Mark distracted in the garage, the dog curled at my feet, the hum of the dishwasher covering any sound I made. I slipped the camera into its spot, angling it toward the front door and the couch. My heart pounded, a mix of fear and determination. It felt like crossing a line I could never step back from, but I knew I had to. That night, as he once again encouraged me to go out and enjoy myself, I smiled, kissed his cheek, and pretended to leave. But for the first time, I wasn't walking away empty-handed. I was walking away with a plan, and I had no idea just how much that little camera was about to change everything. That evening, I did what I always did, grabbed my purse, slipped on my jacket, and let the door close behind me. But instead of driving across town to meet my friends, I circled the block and parked a few streets away. My heart thudded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Sitting there in the dark, engine off, I felt like a stranger in my own life. A woman spying on her own marriage, desperate for answers she already feared. The hours dragged on like years. I stared at my phone, fingers trembling as I opened the app that connected to the hidden camera. At first it showed nothing, just our quiet living room, the glow of a lamp, the shadow of the dog pacing. I almost convinced myself I was wrong, that I'd gone too far. But then I saw him. Mark, opening the door with a grin so wide it made my stomach twist. And she was there. A woman I'd never seen, walking in with a bottle of wine like she belonged. The way he leaned in to kiss her, tender, practiced, intimate, told me everything I needed to know. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. In that moment, it wasn't just betrayal. It was confirmation. All the little pieces I'd been collecting fell into place with a single brutal click. I couldn't breathe. Watching them move through my home, our home, was like being trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. They laughed, poured wine into glasses I had washed with my own hands, settled onto the couch where I had sat only hours earlier. Every brush of his hand against her skin felt like a knife, cutting deeper than I thought possible. I pressed the phone to my chest, as if hiding it could somehow shield me from what I was seeing. Tears burned my eyes, but anger rose hotter, sharper. I wanted to burst through the door, to scream, to shatter the lie right there and then. But something inside me stopped. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was survival. But I knew one thing. If I confronted him now, it would end in shouting, excuses, and his twisted version of the truth. He'd find a way to turn it back on me, to make me question myself all over again. So I didn't move. I let the fire settle in my chest, shaping itself into something steadier. I wiped my face, straightened my shoulders, and stared at that screen until every second burned into my memory. If he thought he could betray me in silence, then he didn't know me at all. I wasn't just his wife. I was about to become his reckoning. When the video ended, I sat in my car staring at the black screen, my hands still trembling. The night outside was silent, but inside me, a storm was raging. I thought of every meal I'd cooked, every birthday candle I'd lit, every promise he'd made while looking me in the eyes. All of it shattered in the span of minutes. The weight of betrayal pressed on my chest, heavy, suffocating, but under it pulsed something else. Resolve. I drove home later than usual, careful to make it look like nothing was wrong. Mark was already asleep, his arms stretched across the bed like he owned the space. I slid in quietly beside him, staring at the ceiling while he breathed, blissfully unaware that I knew. The silence between us that night wasn't emptiness anymore. It was power. Mine. Because I had seen enough to end our marriage right then and there. But I didn't want an ending whispered in private, tucked away behind closed doors. No. He had chosen our home as the stage for his betrayal, and I would use that same stage to expose him. I lay awake, eyes open, planning. And with every passing minute, the shape of my revenge grew sharper. A week later, I slipped into character as easily as if I'd rehearsed it. Over breakfast, I smiled at Mark and told him I was heading out with the girls again that evening. He barely looked up from his coffee before grinning, that same guilty spark in his eyes. "That's great, Claire. Have fun," he said, almost too quickly. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice light, my expression calm, as if I hadn't already mapped out every step of what was about to unfold. What he didn't know was that I'd been making a very different set of plans. Instead of calling my friends, I reached out to his family, his parents, his siblings, people who still believed in the image of Mark, the faithful husband, the steady man. I invited them over for a surprise dinner. "It'll be casual," I promised, keeping my tone breezy. "Just us, just family." They agreed without hesitation, touched by what they thought was a thoughtful gesture. That night, I set the table with care, every plate gleaming, every glass polished. My hands shook not from nerves but from anticipation. I imagined Mark walking through that door, arm around the woman he thought he could hide forever, only to find his entire world staring back at him. The same house he had turned into a place of betrayal was about to become the stage for his downfall. The clock ticked louder than usual that evening, each second stretching out like a drumbeat. His family arrived one by one, their faces glowing with curiosity. "What's the occasion?" his mother asked, handing me a bottle of wine. I smiled, steady as ever, and said, "You'll see." The room filled with small talk and laughter, but beneath it, I felt the weight of what was about to happen. Every chair around that table was a witness waiting to be seated. I poured drinks, passed plates, and played the gracious hostess, though my mind was locked on the front door. The dog sat near my feet, ears twitching every time the sound of a car passed. My pulse quickened at each noise, each pair of headlights flashing across the window. I could almost feel the walls of the house leaning in, ready to hold the moment inside them forever. And then, the sound I had been waiting for, the scrape of the key in the lock, the creak of the door swinging open. My heart stopped, and the room fell quiet. Mark stepped inside, his hand linked with hers, both of them grinning, expecting dim lights and romance. Instead, they froze. His family turned in unison, silence wrapping around the table like a noose. It was the kind of silence you don't come back from. Mark's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a man caught mid-lie. The woman at his side stumbled back, clutching her purse as if it could shield her from the stares. His mother's hand went to her chest. His father's jaw tightened, and his siblings looked back and forth in disbelief. The air was thick with betrayal, a silence louder than any scream. And that was when I moved. I stood, calm, deliberate, and picked up the remote. With one click, the TV flickered to life, the hidden camera footage playing for everyone to see. Gasps filled the room as Mark's own actions replayed in front of his family. Every kiss, every laugh, every shameless touch. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat back down, and let the evidence speak louder than any words ever could. Finally, I met his eyes. "You wanted me out of the house so badly," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the stunned silence. I lifted my glass slowly, holding it just high enough. Tonight, I stayed in, and brought company. The weight of my words hung in the air, sealing the moment. Mark stood frozen in the wreckage of his own lies, while I held all the power. The moment shattered like glass. His mistress bolted first, clutching her purse and muttering apologies no one cared to hear. She slipped past his stunned family and disappeared into the night. Mark stammered, reaching for words that didn't exist, while his parents sat frozen, their eyes wide with shame. The man they thought they knew stood exposed in his own living room, stripped of every excuse. And me? I'd never felt more steady in my life. He tried to reach for me then, his voice shaking. "Claire, wait. It's not..." But I didn't flinch. I set my glass down, folded the napkin neatly beside my plate, and turned to his family instead. "This," I said softly, "is what's been happening while I was out." Their silence was answer enough. The disappointment etched into their faces burned deeper than any anger I could have unleashed. It was the kind of judgment that leaves no room for escape. Mark's father finally spoke, his voice gravelly with rage. "How could you?" His mother wiped her eyes, unable to look at him. And in that moment, Mark wasn't a husband, wasn't even a son. He was just a man caught in the wreckage of his own lies. I didn't scream, I didn't argue. I simply stood, collected my things, and walked out of the house that would no longer be his kingdom. The very next morning, I met with my lawyer. No hesitation, no second guessing. I wanted everything in writing, official and permanent. Divorce papers were filed before Mark even had a chance to crawl out from under the shame. To my surprise, his own family stood behind me, offering words of support, even promising to testify if needed. It was as if they, too, were reclaiming something stolen by his deceit. Calls from him poured in, one after another, buzzing through my phone like a desperate swarm. I didn't answer a single one. I didn't owe him my time, my explanations, or my tears anymore. He had taken enough from me, and now his words had no power. Each ignored call was its own small victory, a reminder that silence can be the loudest rejection of all. I stayed in the house, the place that had once felt poisoned by his lies. The settlement made it mine, every room reclaimed, every corner washed clean of his shadow. At night, I slept with the windows open, letting fresh air sweep through, breathing freedom into walls that had once witnessed betrayal. For the first time in years, the space belonged entirely to me. Not us, just me. Weeks later, my living room looked nothing like the battlefield it had once been. The table that had held his downfall now held bowls of snacks, glasses clinking, and the sound of laughter spilling into every corner. My friends filled the space with stories and music, the kind of easy joy that doesn't need to hide behind lies. The dog curled happily by my feet, finally at peace, as if he too knew the storm had passed. I watched them, my chosen family, and felt something I hadn't in a long time: freedom. No second guessing, no waiting for the other shoe to drop. Just me, surrounded by women who lifted me up, the kind of laughter that heals wounds no one can see. I raised my glass, not to toast what I'd lost, but what I'd found again: myself. And as the night carried on, I thought of Mark's words, the ones he'd repeated so often. You should go out more. He was right, in a way. I did go out. Not to bars, not to girls' nights he never cared about. I went out of his life and I never looked back. Out. Forever.
Your services are no longer required. Please clear out your desk by noon. The words struck me like a physical blow as I stood in front of Mr. Gregory Reed, the newly appointed CEO of Meridian Manufacturing. I had just finished presenting our quarterly financial report, which showed a 15% increase in profitability under my financial stewardship. I don't understand, I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. The company is performing exceptionally well. What exactly is the issue with my work? This isn't about your performance, Michael, Reed replied dismissively. We're implementing a new organizational structure, and your position has been deemed redundant. Your severance details are in this envelope. He slid a manila envelope across his immaculate glass desk without making eye contact. The morning sun filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office seemed to mock the darkness that had suddenly enveloped my professional life. My name is Michael Donovan. For the past 12 years, I had served as Chief Financial Officer at Meridian Manufacturing, a family-owned business that produced specialized industrial equipment. The company had been founded by Harold Meridian 40 years ago and had grown steadily under the leadership of the Meridian family, until 3 months ago, that is when Harold's son-in-law, Gregory Reed, had taken over as CEO. The transition had been unexpected. Harold's daughter, Vanessa Meridian, had been groomed for leadership since joining the company after completing her MBA. She had worked in every department, learning the business from the ground up, and had been serving effectively as COO for the past 5 years. Everyone, including Harold, had expected her to take over when he retired. But then Gregory Reed entered the picture. He had married Vanessa's younger sister, Elaine, 2 years ago. With a background in private equity and a Harvard Business School pedigree, Reed had quickly ingratiated himself with Harold, offering advice on modernizing the company's approach to finance and operations. The severance package includes 3 months' salary and benefits, Reed continued, checking his watch impatiently. HR will assist with the transition. We've already brought in a financial consultant from my previous firm to handle your responsibilities in the interim. I stared at him, struggling to process what was happening. Today is the 15th, I said. We have vendor payments scheduled, the quarterly tax filing due, and a meeting with our banking partners about the expansion financing. The consultant is familiar with all those matters, Reed replied dismissively. We've been transitioning information for the past 2 weeks. Behind my back. For 2 weeks. The realization that this had been planned well in advance, that my termination had been orchestrated, while I continued to work diligently for the company's benefit, sent a wave of cold anger through me. I'll need to properly hand over my files and brief whoever is taking over. I insisted, my professional instincts overriding my personal distress. That won't be necessary. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings, and your access to all company systems has already been revoked. As if on cue, the door opened and Meridian's head of security, a man named Denton who I had always had a friendly relationship with, entered the office. His uncomfortable expression told me he found the situation as distasteful as I did. Mr. Reed, Vanessa Meridian is asking to speak with you urgently, Denton said, pointedly not looking in my direction. "Tell her I'm in a meeting," Reed replied irritably. "She's quite insistent, sir. She says it's about the Westbrook contract." Reed's expression tightened. The Westbrook contract was our largest account, one that I had personally helped secure through careful financial structuring that benefited both parties. "Fine," he snapped. "Escort Mr. Donovan out first, then tell her I'll be available in 10 minutes. Denton finally met my eyes, apology written across his features. "This way, Michael." As we walked through the executive floor toward my office, Denton spoke quietly. "This isn't right, Michael. Everyone knows it." "What's happening here, Frank?" I asked equally quietly. "Where's Harold in all this?" "Harold's been in poor health. He's essentially retired from day-to-day operations." Reed convinced the board that Meridian needed a more aggressive growth strategy and positioned himself as the person to deliver it. And Vanessa? Outmaneuvered, at least temporarily. Reed brought in 3 new board members from his network before making his move. We reached my office, where I found 2 cardboard boxes already waiting. My computer was shut down, and several drawers in my filing cabinet stood open, their contents obviously rifled through. "They've already been through my things?" I asked, incredulous. Denton looked even more uncomfortable. "Reed's consultant and the IT director were in here last night. I'm sorry, Michael. This whole situation stinks." I packed quickly, taking only personal items, family photos, a few books, the fountain pen Harold had given me on my 10-year anniversary with the company. As I worked, my mind raced, considering the implications of what was happening and what I should do next. "Frank," I said as I finished, "tell Vanessa I'd be happy to talk if she wants to reach out. My personal cell is still the same." He nodded, taking one of the boxes while I carried the other. "I'll let her know." At the lobby security desk, I surrendered my company ID and parking pass. The receptionist, Marta, who had been with Meridian almost as long as I had, looked close to tears. "This isn't right, Mr. Donovan," she whispered. "Everyone's talking about it." "Thanks, Marta," I replied gently. "Take care of yourself." The drive home was a blur. My wife, Karen, wasn't expecting me. She was at the hospital where she worked as a pediatric surgeon. Our 2 teenagers were at school. The empty house seemed to amplify the sudden silence in my professional life. I placed the boxes in my home office and sat heavily in my chair, finally opening the severance envelope. The terms were as Reed had stated: 3 months' salary and benefits, a non-disparagement clause, and a request to sign a document acknowledging my termination was not due to performance issues. My phone rang, startling me, an unknown number. "Michael Donovan speaking," I answered professionally, force of habit. "Michael, it's Vanessa Meridian." Her voice was tight with controlled anger. "I just heard what happened. Can we meet?" "Of course," I replied, surprised but relieved to hear from her. "When and where?" "There's a coffee shop called Redwood on 4th Street. Can you be there in an hour?" "I'll be there." Exactly 60 minutes later, I found myself sitting across from Vanessa Meridian in a quiet corner of the independent coffee shop. At 42, Vanessa had inherited her father's sharp business acumen and her mother's grace under pressure. Today, however, the strain was evident in the tightness around her eyes. "First, I want to apologize," she began after we'd exchanged brief greetings. "What happened to you today was unconscionable, and it happened without my knowledge or consent." "I appreciate that," I replied. "But I get the sense there's more going on than my termination." Vanessa nodded grimly. "Gregory is systematically removing everyone loyal to my father and replacing them with his own people. 4 department heads have been restructured in the past month. You're the highest-ranking executive to go so far." "Why?" "The company is profitable, well-managed." "Because Gregory doesn't want to run my father's company," she interrupted. "He wants to strip it, sell off the valuable parts, and absorb the cash into his own ventures." I sat back stunned. "That would destroy everything your father built." "Exactly. And my father is too ill to see what's happening. Gregory has isolated him, controls who visits, what information he receives." "What about the board?" 3 of the 7 members are Gregory's former colleagues. 2 others are easily manipulated. Only my father's oldest friend, Arthur Jenkins, and I stand opposed, but we're outvoted." "And Elaine, your sister?" Vanessa's expression clouded. "Elaine believes everything Gregory tells her. She thinks he's saving the company from outdated management practices. So what's your next move? I asked. That's partly why I wanted to meet with you, Vanessa said, leaning forward. I need your help, Michael. Gregory may have control of the board, but there's something he doesn't know. Which is, my father structured the company's articles of incorporation with a special provision. If the company attempts to sell more than 25% of its assets within a 5-year period, it triggers a supermajority voting requirement. 75% of shareholders must approve. I nodded, remembering the provision. I had helped Harold implement it years ago as protection against hostile takeovers. The Meridian Family Trust holds 65% of the shares. Vanessa continued. Most people, including Gregory, assume my father controls all those shares as trustee. But that's not the case. The trust is divided, I realized, recalling the complex structure we had created. Harold, you and Elaine each control a portion. Exactly. My father controls 25%, I control 25%, and Elaine controls 15%. The remaining 35% is divided among long-term employees and a few outside investors. So even if Gregory convinces Elaine and the outside investors to support asset sales, he still needs your approval or your father's to reach the 75% threshold. I concluded. Yes, but here's where things get complicated. My father's health is deteriorating. If he becomes incapacitated, his voting rights pass to a designated proxy, who used to be my mother until she passed away last year. My father never updated the proxy designation. So in case of his incapacity, his 25% effectively becomes deadlocked, I realized. No one can vote those shares, which still prevents Gregory from reaching 75%. But it's a precarious situation, Vanessa confirmed. What I need is documented evidence of Gregory's intentions. If I can prove to the board that he's planning to dismantle the company rather than grow it, I might be able to persuade some of them to reconsider their support. And you think I can help find this evidence? I know you keep meticulous records, Michael. In the months since Gregory arrived, have you seen anything suspicious? Unusual requests for financial information, meetings with potential buyers for divisions of the company? I thought carefully, mentally reviewing the past 3 months. He did request comprehensive valuation reports for each business unit, ostensibly for strategic planning. And there were several conference calls he conducted from his office with parties he never identified. That's helpful, but not definitive, Vanessa said, disappointment evident in her voice. However, I continued, 2 weeks ago, he asked me to prepare a detailed analysis of the tax implications of selling our R&D division and manufacturing facilities while retaining the intellectual property and outsourcing production. I have copies of that analysis on my personal drive because I was working on it at home. Vanessa's eyes widened. That's exactly what I need. It shows he's exploring structural changes that would fundamentally alter the company's operations without disclosing those plans to the board. I'll send you the files this afternoon, I promised. But Vanessa, you should know, Reed mentioned bringing in a financial consultant from his previous firm. They've already begun transitioning my responsibilities. Jonathan Fielding, Vanessa supplied. Former colleague of Gregory's from Avalon Partners, the same private equity firm that was recently investigated for asset stripping 3 manufacturing companies in the Midwest. That's concerning. It gets worse. I've learned that Fielding has been reviewing our customer contracts, particularly the Westbrook account. I believe Gregory intends to renegotiate our major contracts to improve short-term profitability at the expense of long-term relationships. The Westbrook contract, that explained Reed's reaction when Denton mentioned it earlier. The Westbrook terms are carefully balanced, I said. Any attempt to squeeze more profit from them would damage a relationship we've spent years building. Exactly. And Westbrook accounts for nearly 30% of our revenue. We spent the next hour formulating a strategy. By the time we parted, I had agreed to compile all the potentially relevant information from my records and to reach out discreetly to certain long-term employees who held smaller equity stakes in the company. 3 days later, I received an unexpected visitor at my home. I was in my office, organizing the financial documentation Vanessa had requested, when the doorbell rang. Opening the front door, I found Harold Meridian himself standing on my porch, supported by a cane and accompanied by a home health aide who waited respectfully a few steps behind. "Harold," I said, genuinely shocked to see him. "Please come in." Thank you, Michael, he replied, his voice weaker than I remembered, but his eyes still sharp. I apologize for arriving unannounced, but certain conversations shouldn't happen over the phone. I helped him to the living room sofa, offered refreshments which he declined, and sat across from him, waiting. I understand my son-in-law terminated your employment, Harold began directly, without consulting me or providing a reasonable explanation. That's correct, I confirmed, seeing no benefit in sugarcoating the situation. Vanessa has been to see me, he continued. She shared her concerns about Gregory's intentions for Meridian. At first, I didn't want to believe it. Gregory has been so attentive, so insistent that his only concern is modernizing the company for growth. Harold paused, looking down at his hands, once strong and capable, now thin and slightly trembling. But I've built businesses for 40 years, Michael. I know the difference between growth strategies and extraction strategies. What Gregory describes as unlocking value sounds remarkably like dismantling everything I've built. I've compiled some information that supports those concerns, I said, gesturing toward my office. Financial analysis that Gregory requested specifically examining how to separate and sell company assets. Vanessa mentioned that. I'd like to see those documents, Harold said firmly. But first, I need to ask you something important. If we manage to remove Gregory from his position, would you be willing to return to Meridian? Not just as CFO, but in an expanded role working directly with Vanessa to stabilize the company. The question caught me by surprise. Despite the abrupt and humiliating way I'd been terminated, I had never stopped caring about Meridian Manufacturing, its employees, and its legacy. I would, I answered honestly. I've always believed in what Meridian stands for: quality, integrity, and genuine partnership with both employees and customers. That's worth fighting for. Harold nodded, satisfaction visible in his expression. Good. Now let's review those documents. We have a shareholders meeting to prepare for. The next week was a flurry of discrete activity. Harold, despite his diminished physical strength, demonstrated that his strategic mind remained formidable. He authorized me to contact Arthur Jenkins and other potential allies on the board. Vanessa worked with the company's original legal counsel, who had been sidelined but not yet replaced by Gregory, to prepare the necessary resolutions for the shareholders' meeting. Most delicate was the situation with Elaine. After much discussion, Harold decided to speak with his younger daughter personally, without Gregory present. The conversation apparently lasted hours and involved painful truths about Gregory's business history that Harold's private investigator had uncovered, information that had been deliberately kept from Elaine. By the time the emergency shareholders meeting convened, we had secured commitments from enough stakeholders to constitute more than 80% of the voting shares, including, crucially, Elaine's 15%, which she had agreed to vote according to her father's recommendation after learning the full extent of her husband's plans. I wasn't present for the actual meeting, but Vanessa called me immediately afterward. It's done, she said, her voice showing relief and exhaustion in equal measure. Gregory has been removed as CEO by unanimous board vote. Arthur Jenkins will serve as interim CEO until a permanent replacement is appointed. How did Gregory take it? I asked. Not well, Vanessa replied, a hint of grim satisfaction in her tone. He threatened lawsuits, claimed breach of contract, the usual. But once our legal counsel presented evidence that he had been exploring sale options without board approval and in violation of his fiduciary duty, he became much quieter. A separation agreement is being drafted now, generous enough to avoid litigation, but with ironclad provisions preventing him from any future involvement with Meridian or its clients. And Elaine. Vanessa sighed. That's the most painful part. She's filed for separation and moved back to our father's house temporarily. She feels deeply betrayed, by Gregory, of course, but also somewhat by us for not helping her see his true character sooner. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. Family businesses always intertwine the professional and the personal. That's both their strength and their vulnerability. Yes, Vanessa agreed. But speaking of family business, my father and the board would like to meet with you tomorrow morning at 10. Can you make it? Of course. The following morning, I arrived at Meridian Manufacturing 15 minutes early, feeling a strange mixture of apprehension and hope. Marta greeted me at the reception desk with a warm smile and a visitor badge, a somewhat ironic formality given my 12 years with the company. Everyone's so happy you're here, Mr. Donovan," she said quietly. "Things haven't been right since you left." "Thank you, Marta. It's good to see you too." Frank Denton appeared to escort me to the boardroom, shaking my hand firmly. "Welcome back, Michael, or at least, hopefully welcome back." The boardroom contained the full board of directors, including Harold, who sat at the head of the table, looking more energized than he had at my home the previous week. Vanessa sat to his right, with Arthur Jenkins to his left. The remaining board members, including those who had previously supported Gregory, showed varying degrees of discomfort and respect as I entered. "Michael," Harold began once I was seated, "thank you for coming. The events of the past week have made it clear that Meridian needs to return to the principles and leadership style that built its success. The board has unanimously approved a restructuring of our executive team." He gestured to Vanessa, who continued seamlessly. "We would like to offer you the position of Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer, reporting directly to me as the new Chief Executive Officer. This represents an expansion of your previous responsibilities to include strategic planning and operational oversight in partnership with the CEO. Arthur Jenkins, a man of few words, added, "Your loyalty to this company, even after being unjustly removed from it, speaks volumes about your character, Michael. The board is unanimous in its desire to have you return in this enhanced capacity." I looked around the table, noting the nodding heads of even those board members who had supported Gregory's ascension. Perhaps they were simply aligning themselves with the new power structure, but their approval seemed genuine. "I'm honored by your confidence," I replied. "Before I accept, however, I'd like to understand the board's vision for Meridian's future. The past few months have revealed vulnerabilities in our governance and succession planning that should be addressed to prevent similar situations from arising again." Harold smiled, the familiar expression of approval I'd seen whenever I asked necessary but difficult questions during my tenure. "An excellent point," he acknowledged. "Vanessa, would you outline the governance changes we discussed?" For the next half hour, Vanessa detailed a comprehensive plan to strengthen Meridian's corporate governance, including expanding the board with independent directors, implementing more robust succession planning, and creating additional checks and balances on executive authority. Additionally, she concluded, "We're establishing a stock ownership program that will increase employee equity participation over the next 5 years. We believe that broader ownership will strengthen commitment to the company's long-term success and make it more difficult for any individual to gain disproportionate influence." The plan addressed virtually all the concerns I would have raised. It balanced family control with professional management, created appropriate oversight mechanisms, and aligned everyone's interests with the company's sustainable growth. In that case, I said I would be proud to accept the position and help implement this vision. The relief and approval around the table was palpable. As the meeting concluded and board members offered their congratulations, Harold asked me to stay behind. Once we were alone with Vanessa, he spoke with the directness that had always characterized his leadership. "When I brought Gregory into this company, I made a serious error in judgment," he admitted. "I allowed personal considerations, my desire to see both my daughters happily settled in the family business, to override the careful evaluation I would have applied to any other executive candidate." "Dad, you couldn't have known," Vanessa began. "I could have and should have," Harold interrupted gently. "The signs were there. His history of short-term positions, the vagueness about his accomplishments, his rapid shift from courting Elaine to courting me for a position in the company. I chose not to see them because I wanted to believe the best of the man my daughter had married." He turned to me. "Michael, one of the most valuable traits in a business leader is the ability to acknowledge mistakes and learn from them. I've made a significant one, and the company nearly paid the price. I'm grateful that you and Vanessa had the courage and foresight to prevent that outcome. We all want what's best for Meridian," I replied simply. "Indeed, and now, with the right leadership team in place, I can focus on my health with greater peace of mind." The transition back into Meridian was remarkably smooth. My former team welcomed me enthusiastically, and even those executives who had been brought in during Gregory's brief tenure seemed relieved by the return to more transparent and collaborative leadership. Within 6 months, the company had not only stabilized but begun implementing the strategic growth initiatives that Vanessa and I had developed together. Our emphasis on innovation, quality, and strong customer relationships proved to be exactly what the market was seeking in an increasingly commoditized industry. As for Gregory Reed, he left the city shortly after his removal, reportedly taking a position with a private equity firm on the West Coast. Elaine eventually filed for divorce and, after some time away, returned to Meridian in a role managing our newly established charitable foundation. Perhaps the most significant change came a year after the shareholders' meeting that had altered Meridian's trajectory. Harold, whose health had improved with reduced stress and proper treatment, called Vanessa and me to his home one evening. "I've been thinking about the future," he said as we sat in his study. "Not just Meridian's future, but my own." He handed each of us a document, the updated trust agreement governing the Meridian family shares. "I've restructured the trust," he explained. "Upon my eventual passing, my 25% ownership will be divided. 10% will go to the Employee Ownership Fund. 5% will be held in trust for Elaine. The remaining 10% will be divided equally between you, Vanessa, and you, Michael." I looked up stunned. "Harold, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," he replied with a smile. "You've demonstrated something I've always believed but rarely found, that family businesses need both family and non-family leaders who care deeply about their legacy. You've earned your place in Meridian's future, not through marriage or birth, but through dedication and principle." Vanessa reached over and squeezed my hand. "I couldn't agree more, Dad. Michael has been part of the Meridian family in every way that matters." 3 years have passed since that conversation. Harold still serves as chairman of the board, though his day-to-day involvement has naturally decreased with age. Vanessa has proven to be an exceptional CEO, balancing innovation with the core values that made Meridian successful. And in my role as Executive Vice President, I found fulfillment in helping to guide the company's financial strategy while mentoring the next generation of leaders. The crisis precipitated by Gregory Reed's brief tenure taught us all valuable lessons about governance, succession, and the delicate balance between family and business interests. But perhaps the most important lesson was more personal. Sometimes losing your position can ultimately lead to finding your place. As Harold often says now when recounting the story to new employees, the true measure of a company isn't whether it avoids mistakes, but how it responds to them. And the true measure of leadership isn't authority, but accountability. Words to build a business by, and to live by as well. "Still messing around with that app thing?" my father asked, barely glancing up from his newspaper. The question hung in the air over our Sunday dinner table, weighted with familiar disappointment. I pushed the green beans around my plate, swallowing the defensive response that rose to my throat. 29 years old, and family dinners still reduced me to feeling like a teenager. "It's not just an app, Dad. It's a comprehensive wellness platform," I said quietly, reaching for my water glass. "We've doubled our user base in the last quarter." "That's nice, honey," my mother chimed in with that particular tone, the one that meant she wasn't really listening. "Did I tell you that Richard's son just made partner at his law firm? Only 32. They're celebrating with a trip to Bali." My brother Alex smirked across the table. Meanwhile, Ellie's celebrating another round of trying to convince people to pay for something they could do for free. "It's not." I started, but my father cut me off. "Elena, we're just concerned. It's been 3 years since you left your perfectly good job at Martin & Shaw. 3 years of," he gestured vaguely in my direction, "this startup fantasy. Your apartment is tiny, you're driving that same old car. And for what? Some app that tracks people's feelings?" "Synapse doesn't just track feelings," I said, feeling my cheeks heat up. "It's an AI-driven mental wellness platform that helps people recognize patterns in their emotional health and provides personalized resources. We're working with 3 major corporate clients now, and—" "Oh, sweetheart," my mother interrupted, reaching over to pat my hand. "Wouldn't it be easier to just go back to marketing? Judith says her company is always looking for experienced people, and the benefits are wonderful." I pulled my hand away. "I don't want to go back to marketing, Mom. I'm building something important." My father sighed heavily. "Elena, at some point, you need to face reality. You're approaching 30. This is the time to build a career, not play entrepreneur." "Who's playing?" I muttered, but no one was listening anymore. The conversation had already shifted to Alex's recent promotion at the investment bank where he'd worked since graduation, a proper career path in my family's eyes. I excused myself early, citing work to finish. It wasn't a lie. There was always work to do when you were bootstrapping a company with minimal outside funding. As I drove back to my apartment, I replayed the dinner conversation in my mind, a familiar heaviness settling in my chest. My phone buzzed with a text from Mia, my co-founder and best friend since college. How was the family inquisition? Same as always, I typed back. Dad thinks I'm wasting my life. Mom thinks I need benefits. Alex thinks I'm a joke. 3 dots appeared immediately. And you? I smiled despite myself. I think we need to nail this health first pitch on Tuesday. That's my girl. See you at the office tomorrow. 8 a.m. sharp. We've got this. I arrived at our office, a converted industrial space we shared with 3 other startups, at 7:15 the next morning. The quiet before everyone arrived was my favorite time to work, when I could focus without interruptions. Our space wasn't much. A cluster of desks, a small conference room we'd built ourselves with reclaimed wood and glass, and a kitchenette area. But to me, it represented everything: freedom, possibility, purpose. I opened my laptop and dived into the presentation for Health First, one of the largest healthcare providers in the region. If we landed this contract, it would transform our company overnight. Mia arrived at 7:45, balancing 2 coffee cups and her ever-present tablet. At 30, she was only a year older than me, but carried herself with a confidence I sometimes envied. She'd walked away from a promising engineering career at Google to join me in this venture, something my family couldn't fathom. "You're early," she observed, sliding a coffee onto my desk. Couldn't sleep. I've been refining the ROI projections for the pitch. I rubbed my eyes. If we can demonstrate a 15% reduction in employee burnout through our platform, their savings would be substantial. Mia peered over my shoulder at the spreadsheet. These numbers are compelling. Add in the reduced healthcare utilization data from our pilot, and they'd be crazy not to sign with us. By 9:30, our small team had begun to arrive. We were 11 people in total now: 4 developers, 2 UX designers, a data scientist, a content creator, a business development rep, Mia, and me. Each person had taken a risk to join us, believing in our vision when most considered it a long shot. Morning team meeting in 5, I called out, watching as they settled at their desks. "We'll keep it quick today. Lots to do before Tuesday." The meeting was focused and energetic, everyone reporting their progress and plans for the day. Despite the pressure of the upcoming pitch, there was laughter, collaboration, and a palpable sense of shared purpose. It struck me, as it often did, how different this felt from my years in corporate marketing, where meetings had been exercises in politics and self-preservation. "Ellie, got a minute?" It was Raj, our lead developer, catching me as the meeting dispersed. I followed him to his desk, where he showed me a new feature he'd been working on. A predictive module that could identify potential mental health challenges before users themselves recognized the warning signs. "This is incredible, Rad," I said, genuinely impressed. "Is it ready to demo?" "I can have it polished by tomorrow. Should we include it in the Health First pitch?" I considered it. The feature was exactly what could set us apart from competitors. But including untested functionality was risky. "Let's do it," I decided. "But let's be transparent that it's in final development. They'll appreciate the innovation and the honesty." Raj nodded, already turning back to his screen, fingers flying across the keyboard. By late afternoon, I was deep in pitch preparations when my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail but sighed and answered. "Hi, Mom." "Elena, honey, I've been thinking about our conversation at dinner," she began, her voice taking on that concerned tone I knew all too well. "I ran into Catherine Miller at the grocery store. Her daughter works in HR at Bristow and Associates, and they have an opening in their marketing department." I could put in a word. "Mom," I interrupted, pinching the bridge of my nose. "I appreciate the thought, but I'm not looking for a marketing job. I'm running a company. I understand you're doing this app thing for now, but it's always good to have options. You were so good at marketing, Elena. You had such a bright future." I bit back my frustration. "I still have a bright future, Mom. Just not the one you imagined for me. I just worry about your security, your retirement, your healthcare." "I have to go, Mom. We have a major pitch on Tuesday that could change everything for us." I cut her off as gently as I could. "I'll call you later this week, okay?" After hanging up, I sat staring at my phone, a familiar mix of guilt and resentment churning inside me. Why couldn't they understand? Why couldn't they even try to see what I was building? Family? Maya asked, appearing at my desk with a knowing look. How'd you guess? I smiled weakly. Your "my parents don't understand me" face is pretty distinctive after all these years. She sat on the edge of my desk. What was it this time? Another job lead? Concern about your biological clock. Questions about your 401 key. Job lead, I confirmed. Apparently, I was so good at marketing. You were also miserable, Mia pointed out. Remember when you had to create that campaign for that weight loss pill that was basically just laxatives? You cried in the bathroom for an hour. I laughed despite myself. God, that was awful. And now you're building something that actually helps people. That matters. She stood up. Come on, the team's ordering dinner. We're all staying late to prep for Tuesday. As we walked toward the others, I felt that familiar surge of gratitude for this found family who believed in our vision. Whatever my parents thought, these people got it. They understood what we were trying to build. Tuesday arrived with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The Health First pitch represented our biggest opportunity yet, a chance to implement our platform across their entire system of hospitals and clinics, reaching thousands of healthcare workers struggling with burnout and mental health challenges. I dressed carefully in my one good suit, a navy blue number I'd bought back in my corporate days. My apartment was indeed small, as my father had pointed out, a one-bedroom in a not particularly trendy neighborhood, but it was all I needed. Most of my savings had gone into Synapse, a fact my family found incomprehensible. Mia picked me up at 8:30, her usual confident self in a crisp white shirt and charcoal pants. Ready to change the future of mental health support, she asked as I slid into the passenger seat. Born ready, I replied, though my stomach was doing somersaults. The presentation went better than we could have hoped. The predictive feature Raj had developed generated exactly the excitement we'd anticipated, and our ROI projections sparked intense interest from Health First's CFO. Your platform addresses precisely the challenges we've been struggling to solve, their chief medical officer said as we concluded. The personalization, the preventative approach, the ease of implementation. It's impressive. We'd like to move forward, their CEO announced much earlier in the meeting than we'd expected such a decision. Let's have our teams work on the details, but consider this a green light. Mia and I maintained our professional composure until we reached the parking garage, then dissolved into squeals and hugs like teenagers. We did it. Mia kept saying, Do you know what this means? This changes everything. And it did. The Health First contract was worth $1.2 million annually, with a 3-year commitment. It would allow us to hire the additional team members we desperately needed, improve our infrastructure, and give us the stability to pursue other major clients. We need to celebrate, Mia declared as we drove back to the office. Team dinner tonight. Somewhere nice. When we arrived back at our office space, the entire team was waiting. One look at our faces told them everything they needed to know, and the room erupted in cheers. Drinks on me tonight, I announced. We're celebrating at Emilio's at 7. Every single one of you made this happen. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of congratulatory messages, planning discussions, and an impromptu champagne toast, using paper cups in the office. Throughout it all, I kept thinking about calling my family, sharing this massive validation of everything they'd dismissed. But something held me back. That evening, surrounded by my team at Emilio's, the nicest restaurant many of us could afford even for special occasions, I watched as they celebrated, their faces alight with pride and excitement. These people had believed in Synapse when it was just an idea. They'd taken risks, worked ridiculous hours, and poured their talents into building something meaningful. Speech. Someone called out, and suddenly everyone was tapping their glasses. I stood feeling a surge of emotion as I looked at each face. 3 years ago, I left a job that looked good on paper but left me feeling empty. I had this idea that technology could do more than just track our steps or count our calories, that it could help people understand their emotional health and get support when they needed it most. I paused, thinking about those early days. Most people thought it was a pipe dream, a hobby, something I'd eventually give up on when reality hit. My family's faces flashed in my mind. But not you. You saw what I saw, a chance to create something that matters. I raised my glass. Today's win isn't just about a contract, it's about validation. It's proof that we're solving a real problem that affects real people. So this toast isn't to health first, it's to all of you who believed when belief was a scarce commodity. Thank you for making Synapse not just my dream, but ours. As glasses clinked and conversations resumed, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my brother. Hey, haven't heard from you in a while. Everything awk with your app thing. I stared at the message, considering how to respond. In that moment, I realized something important. I didn't need their validation anymore. This victory, this moment belonged to the people who'd been part of the journey, who'd understood the vision without requiring proof. I slipped my phone back into my pocket without responding. Tomorrow would be time enough for family communications. Tonight was for celebrating with the people who'd earned the right to be part of this milestone. 6 months after the Health First contract, Synapse had transformed. We'd moved to a larger office, doubled our team to 22 people, and signed 3 more major clients. Our platform was now supporting over 35,000 users, and the data showed we were making a real difference in how people understood and managed their mental health. I just finished a call with a potential investor when my assistant Tara appeared at my door. Your parents are here, she said, looking slightly uncomfortable. They don't have an appointment, but... I froze. My parents? Here. In the 3.5 years since starting Synapse, they'd never once visited the office. It's fine, I assured her. You can send them in. Moments later, my mother and father stood awkwardly in my office doorway, taking in the space with wide eyes. My mother clutched her purse tightly, while my father seemed unusually hesitant. Mom, Dad, I greeted them, coming around my desk. This is a surprise. What brings you here? We were downtown for lunch, my mother explained, and your father suggested we stop by. We've never seen your workplace. I gestured for them to sit in the visitor chairs. Well, welcome to Synapse. They settled into the chairs, looking around at my office. It wasn't especially large or luxurious, but it was mine, the CEO's office, with glass walls that allowed me to see the bustling workspace beyond, where my team was building something important. It's not what I expected, my father admitted, his eyes landing on the awards we'd recently won for innovation in healthcare technology, prominently displayed on a shelf. What did you expect? I asked, genuinely curious. He shrugged. I don't know. Something smaller, less professional? I suggested. He had the grace to look embarrassed. I suppose so, yes. An awkward silence fell. I could have filled it, could have told them about our recent successes, our growing client lists, our impressive user metrics. But something in me held back. Why was the burden always on me to justify my choices? Finally, my mother spoke. We saw an article, Helena. In the business journal, she fumbled in her purse and produced a slightly crumpled magazine. About you, about Synapse. I recognized it, a feature that had run the previous month profiling emerging health tech companies in the region. We'd been the cover story. Why didn't you tell us? My father asked, and I was surprised to hear hurt in his voice. About any of this. The article says you've raised $5 million in funding. That you're projected to hit $10 million in revenue next year. I leaned back in my chair, considering my response carefully. Every Sunday dinner for 3 years, you asked me when I was going to get a real job. When I tried to tell you about what I was building, you changed the subject or suggested career alternatives. I met their eyes directly. After a while, it seemed easier not to share. You'd made up your minds about Synapse, that it was a hobby, a phase, a waste of time. We were worried about you. My mother insisted. You left such a promising career. For what? I finished for her. For this. I gestured to the space around us, to the team visible through the glass walls. For a company that's helping thousands of people understand their mental health. For work that matters to me. My father cleared his throat. The article says you've been approached about acquisition offers. We have, I confirmed. We've turned them down. His eyebrows shot up. But we're not done yet. I said simply, there's still so much we want to build, so many people we want to help. Another silence fell, this one heavier than the last. I owe you an apology, my father finally said, the words sounding like they cost him considerable effort. I didn't understand what you were doing. I didn't try to understand. We both owe you an apology, my mother added, reaching for my hand across the desk. We were so focused on what we thought success should look like that we couldn't see you were creating your own definition. I felt a lump form in my throat. Thank you for saying that. Would you, my father hesitated. Would you show us around? Help us understand what you've built here. For the next hour, I gave them a tour of our office, introducing them to my team, explaining our platform, showing them user testimonials and data visualizations that demonstrated our impact. They asked questions, real questions, for the first time, and actually listened to my answers. Your brother's coming for dinner tonight, my mother mentioned as they prepared to leave. Would you join us? I'd like to hear more about your plans for the company. I hesitated, years of Sunday dinner disappointments making me wary. No job suggestions, my father promised, a small smile playing at his corners of his mouth. No concerned looks, just a chance to catch up. I'd like that, I agreed, surprised to find I meant it. After they left, Mia appeared in my doorway. So those were the infamous parents, she observed. They seemed different than I expected from your stories. They were different today, I said, still processing the visit. It's amazing what a little external validation can do. That's often how it works, Mia said wisely. People need to see others valuing what you do before they can value it themselves. But hey, she grinned. Better late than never, right? I nodded, turning to look out my window at the city below. You know what's funny? 3 years ago, their approval seemed so important. I wanted it so badly it hurt, and now? Now, Mia prompted. Now it's nice to have. But I don't need it anymore. I turned back to her. Somewhere along the way, I stopped measuring success by their standards. That evening, as I drove to my parents' house for dinner, I reflected on the journey of the past few years. The doubt, the long hours, the financial stress, the victories both small and large. There had been moments when even I questioned whether I was on the right path, when the challenges seemed insurmountable. But I persisted, surrounding myself with people who believed in the vision, who weren't afraid to build something new. And now Synapse was making a real difference in thousands of lives. My phone buzzed with a notification from our user feedback dashboard. This app helped me recognize my anxiety triggers for the first time. I finally got the courage to talk to my doctor. Thank you for creating this. I smiled as I pulled into my parents' driveway. That message represented true success, not the funding rounds, not the revenue projections, not even the long-delayed parental approval. Success was creating something that mattered. Everything else was just noise. There she is, my brother called as I walked through the door. The tech mogul graces us with her presence. I laughed, accepting his hug. Hardly a mogul. Not yet, he conceded with a grin. But the business journal seems to think you're on your way. As we moved to the dining room, I noticed something different. The familiar weight of disapproval was absent, replaced by something that felt almost like respect. So, my father said as we settled around the table, tell us about what's next for Synapse. And I did. For the first time at that table, I spoke freely about my vision, my challenges, my plans for growth. And for the first time, they truly listened. Some people need to see success to believe in it. Others recognize potential and nurture it from the beginning. I was fortunate enough to find the latter in my team, in Mia, in the clients who took a chance on us early on. And now, belatedly, I was finding it in my family too. Better late than never, indeed.